On the night of 13th October 2014 at Liberty Station, San Diego in California, Mathew Sullivan, a U.S. Navy soldier, had found out that his wife, a 31-year-old Elizabeth Sullivan, who was a mother of 2 children, had been cheating on him with another man named Stephen Sutton. Mathew also found out that his wife went to file for a divorce and she was going to take sole custody of their children. Mathew was very angry at his wife, and he couldn't take all of these, so he took a knife and stabbed his wife 5 times in the chest, killing her in the process. Mathew then wrapped her body in a plastic wrap and then stored the body in the freezer in their garage. He kept the body there for about 2 years. When he was relocating with his new family, he removed the body and dumped it in the waters of San Diego Bay. Human beings can sometimes be so evil. This is the story of Elizabeth Sullivan. Elizabeth Ricks was born on August 14, 1983, in Norfolk, Virginia. Her father was known as Rick Edwards. Elizabeth, who was popularly known as Liz, graduated from Cockton High School in 2001. While living in Norfolk, Virginia, where she spent most of her life, she met a man named Mathew Sullivan. Mathew Sullivan grew up in Minnesota. His mother was known as Michelle Sullivan. Later on, Mathew moved to Norfolk, Virginia, where he worked as a soldier in the U.S. Navy, and he was stationed at Naval Base. The two became very good friends, and later on they started dating. Their relationship was perfect at first, and they deeply loved each other. Later on in the year 2010, this couple married each other. After they got married, Mathew was transferred to San Diego, California, so the couple moved to Liberty Station, a neighborhood of San Diego, California. While there, the two lived in a 3-story military housing near the base. Shortly after the couple married each other, Elizabeth became pregnant and was looking forward to giving birth. However, her husband, Mathew, was deployed, therefore he was absent during the period of her pregnancy. After 9 months of pregnancy, Elizabeth gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. It was after giving birth to her daughter that Mathew returned home. After spending a short time with his wife and daughter, Mathew was again deployed. Elizabeth took the responsibilities of their baby alone because her husband was always away for most of the time working in the Navy. Even though Elizabeth was married and had a daughter, she lived the life of a single mother. Later on, Mathew again returned home. During his short stay at home, he impregnated his wife again, so Elizabeth was pregnant with her second child. Mathew was again deployed, and he again missed the chance to be with Elizabeth during the period of her second pregnancy. Elizabeth gave birth to her second daughter in the absence of her husband. While Mathew was away, Elizabeth adjusted herself to her new life without her husband being there for most of the time, and she got used to it. So she established new routines for herself and her 2 daughters. She learned to balance her ever-changing responsibilities. However, later on, her husband, Mathew, came back home after his deployment was over, and so they lived together. Unfortunately, a lot of things had changed in their relationship. Elizabeth was used to living alone with her 2 daughters, and her priorities were her children and not her husband. They began experiencing a lot of problems in their marriage, and soon the problems began to deepen. Elizabeth tried to involve her husband in their children's life, but Mathew showed no interest. The two started engaging in endless fights and arguments over small issues. This made their relationship to deteriorate. Soon they began sleeping in separate rooms on separate floors. Mathew was abusing her, and so she wanted to divorce him. In fact, she had already contacted a divorce attorney, and she had paid the retainer for the attorney using Mathew's credit card. In March 2014, Elizabeth had called 911 during an argument with Mathew over custody and child support. She reported a long history of domestic violence. Police responded, but Mathew was not arrested. Sometimes later, Elizabeth and Mathew were fighting, and Mathew threatened to take her life. Elizabeth got afraid and locked herself in her room. She called one of her friend, Calandra, and told him that Mathew was threatening to kill her. Elizabeth began battling depression, so she was under the care of a psychiatrist. She joined a dating app known as Tinder as a way of passing time. While in the dating app, she met a man known as Stephen Sutton. The two charted from time to time. As time went on, the two started dating each other secretly. Elizabeth would spend time at Stephen's house. During that time, Stephen lived with a roommate. After being in the love relationship for some time, the two eventually separated. On Sunday, October 12th, 2014, Mathew informed Elizabeth that he had already made arrangements for his mother, Michelle Sullivan, his mother's sister and his mother's partner, to live with them in their house in San Diego. He purchased the plane tickets for them, and he was ready for their arrival. Mathew didn't consult his wife about bringing his family into their house, so Elizabeth was extremely angry with him. Elizabeth didn't get along with Mathew's family, so she feared for the safety of her children if Mathew's family would be around them. With the idea of Mathew's family moving into their home, Elizabeth called her friend, Nathan Corrector, who worked at eyewear store, and told him about what was going on in her house. She later went to Nathan's house so that she can clear her head, and she ended up spending the night at Nathan's house. On the 13th October 2014, Elizabeth returned to her house after promising her friend Nathan that she would call him back. When it was at night, Mathew was angry when he discovered that his wife had been cheating on him with Stephen Sutton, a man she met on Tinder. Unfortunately, his wife admitted about having the affair. He was also angry that his wife was divorcing him. Mathew believed that Elizabeth intended to make false accusations against him to the law enforcement in order to have him arrested. He also believed that his wife would have sole custody of their children, so he took a knife and stabbed her 5 times in the chest. Elizabeth succumbed to injuries that had been inflicted on her. Mathew then wrapped her body in a plastic wrapper and hid it in a large standing freezer which was outside the house in the garage where her car was. To eliminate traces of blood in the house, Mathew went to the Home Depot store and bought a carpet cleaner. He then cleaned the room thoroughly, and he hid the knife, which was the murder weapon, under the carpet. The next day, Nathan didn't hear from Elizabeth, and so he began to get worried. He called her, but she didn't answer her phone. Nathan then called her husband, Mathew, and asked him if Elizabeth was okay. However, Mathew told him that he has not heard from her since the day before. Mathew told Nathan that he knew his wife was upset about his family moving in. He guessed that maybe his wife was somewhere blowing off steam, so he was not concerned about her absence since it was not the first time she was going off by herself. Nathan didn't believe Mathew, and he felt like something was wrong, so he called San Diego Police Department and reported Elizabeth as a missing person. At first, the police didn't think that the report was worth considering. Meanwhile, on the early morning of October 14th, 2014, the plane carrying Mathew's family had landed, and Mathew picked them up. Mathew's family was able to move into his house, and they settled in quickly. The family, however, was not even worried that Elizabeth was not present in the house. Later on, Elizabeth's whereabouts had not been traced, and so she was declared by the police as a missing person. The police immediately started their investigations to locate her whereabouts. They went to her home and questioned her husband. Upon being questioned about his wife's whereabouts, Mathew said that they had marital problems, but it wasn't unusual for her to leave. He told the police that he didn't report her as a missing person because he thought she had left him. The police searched the house, but they didn't see anything suspicious. However, they found her car in the garage, and this raised questions about her whereabouts. The police went to the media so that they can find help in locating her. As the investigations continued, the police found out that Elizabeth's phone was off. They also found out that it had been days since anyone has seen or heard from Elizabeth. The investigators learned that the last contact from Elizabeth was from a friend on 13th October. On October 19th, the police received a report from a couple. The couple said they saw Elizabeth near a soccer field not far from her home in Liberty Station before her disappearance. The couple, one of whom was an off-duty sheriff, said that he and his wife spoke to Elizabeth. She was disorientated and was looking for her phone. When they spoke to her, she told them that she had slept in the park the night before. 10 days after that, there was another sighting of Elizabeth near the San Diego airport. However, when the police did their investigations, they found out that the woman who was seen at San Diego airport was not Elizabeth. In November 2014, almost a month after Elizabeth was last seen, her husband Mathew was interviewed by the People magazine, he told the media that he tried looking for her in the neighborhood. He added that if he could get a phone call that Elizabeth was okay, it would put his mind at rest. He spoke about the issues that they had in their marriage, and he revealed that in spite of those, Elizabeth had never gone for more than a day. In the weeks after Elizabeth disappeared, the community rallied around Mathew and his young daughters, who, the age of 2 and 4, Elizabeth's picture was on flyers that were going around the San Diego area with a $1,000 reward for any information, as the police and volunteers continued to search for Elizabeth. Elizabeth's father came all the way from Virginia to San Diego to help in her search. He also helped in taking care of his granddaughters. He went to the local news station, known as NBC7, to ask the public for help in finding his daughter, Elizabeth. 3 months after Elizabeth had disappeared, Mathew started dating another woman. He changed his name on Facebook, and he also changed his relationship status. Soon the family which Mathew brought to stay with him moved out, leaving him with the 2 children. Mathew brought the lady he was dating, and he started another family after he had murdered his wife. Mathew's new lover became pregnant, and soon they decided to relocate. They moved from his old home in San Diego to the city of Baltimore, Maryland State in Delaware. 10 months later, there was no sign of Elizabeth, and there were little information concerning her disappearance, so the case began to go cold. However, as the investigations were ongoing, the police found out about Stephen Sutton, a man whom Elizabeth had been having an affair with. They tried to talk to him, but he refused to talk to them. However, Elizabeth's father begged Stephen to give the investigators any information he had about his daughter. Stephen then released a statement about Elizabeth through his lawyer. He said that a month after Elizabeth was reported missing, he received an email from an account he didn't recognize, but the sender said that she was Elizabeth. Stephen said that he didn't think it was her, and so he asked her a question only she would know. What did she give him for his birthday? And the sender replied with the correct answer, a Gumby keychain. But when investigators asked for the email, Stephen said that he had deleted it. Detectives working on the case had no idea if the email really came from Elizabeth, but if it had, that meant that she was alive a month after she disappeared. Investigators obtained a search warrant for Stephen's home, so they went to Stephen's house. When they searched the house, they found nothing in the house that would connect him to Elizabeth's disappearance. However, when they analyzed Stephen's cell phone, they found several text messages from Mathew. According to the text message, in September 2014, Mathew was angry that his wife had been seeing Stephen, so the investigators turned their attention back to Mathew. As the investigations against Mathew continued, the police discovered that on October 13, 2014, Mathew had made a very strange phone call to 911. In the call, he said that he was afraid that his wife, Elizabeth, was trying to get him evicted or arrested. He said that she took his credit card to hire a lawyer against him, and he said that he was afraid that she was reporting him for going through her emails and journals. An hour and a half later, he called back to report that all the money in he and Elizabeth's joint account had been moved. Police also discovered that Mathew had deleted all his posts about Elizabeth in his social media and had unfriended her and several other people connected to his missing wife. He also shut her phone off. The detectives followed up on Elizabeth's accounts and transactions. They found that the $1,000 balance that she had moved into her personal account remained there untouched. There was one transaction, however, on her credit card that stood out. That was a payment made to a divorce attorney. But during the course of their investigation, detectives found 2 credit card charges that they thought were suspicious, and so they called Mathew in so that they could speak to him again. Now, one of the card charges was for a carpet cleaner that he had purchased the day his wife was reported missing. Mathew said that his family was coming into town, and so he was just getting the house ready for them. Detectives also asked him about the carpet cleaner he had bought a month later and a giant roll of industrial-sized plastic wrap. Mathew said that he had purchased the plastic wrap so that he could wrap up some of his mother's things to put in storage after she had moved in. Detectives said that he had an explanation for everything, so they had no evidence to negate what he had told them. They were suspicious, but they had no proof that Mathew was involved in his wife's disappearance. On the 4th October 2016, a man walking along the water near FTC Park saw a body floating in the shallow waters of San Diego Bay near Liberty Station. The body was found less than half a mile from where Elizabeth lived. So the man called 911, who arrived at the scene. The body was badly decomposed, so the police sent it for autopsy and dental records examination. 2 months later, in December 2016, the result from the dental records were out, and the body was identified as Elizabeth Sullivan. The autopsy confirmed that Elizabeth was stabbed 5 times in the chest with a knife, leading to her death. She also had suffered a broken nose, broken jaw, and broken ribs. The medical examiner who did the autopsy on Elizabeth's body revealed that Elizabeth had died a month or 2 months before she had been found floating in water. Immediately, Elizabeth's was found. The police went to Mathew's house to question him, since they were very suspicious of him. They didn't find him. However, they discovered that Mathew had already moved to Maryland in Delaware with his girlfriend. However, with the absence of Mathew, the investigators did another search on his house. They first focused on Elizabeth's bedroom. They swapped her bathroom with luminol, a chemical used to detect blood, and it lit up. A large blood stain was discovered under the carpet in the master bedroom, having soaked through to the wood flooring beneath. DNA testing confirmed it was Elizabeth's blood. The investigators discovered that the exposed carpet had been cleaned thoroughly. In the attic, police recovered a knife with traces of blood on it. When the knife was tested, the investigators found out that it had DNA from both Elizabeth and Mathew. So the investigators knew that the knife was the murder weapon, so they took it as an evidence. The cadaver dogs, which were brought to search the home, led the investigators straight to a large freezer in the garage. They discovered that the deep freezer, which was connected to a power socket, had been recently emptied. They believed that Elizabeth's body had been stored in the freezer for almost 2 years before it was disposed. The police found several of Elizabeth's personal items, including her diary. In the diary, Elizabeth had written about how she was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and also how she self-medicated herself with different prescription pills. She also wrote about self-harm in her journal and also wrote some sort of made-up story where she talked about a woman who met her knight in shining armor and then how the two of them moved to California and had a daughter, but then things went downhill and she felt like a failure and ended up walking out on her life. And for all things considered, that seemed eerily similar to the life that Elizabeth herself had lived. So police were starting to wonder if there were some parallels between this story that Elizabeth had written and her actual real life. After another year of thorough investigations and gathering of enough evidences, the police were able to secure an arrest warrant against Mathew Sullivan. On Wednesday morning, 31st January 2018, the police arrested Mathew Sullivan outside his home in Wyoming, Delaware, and charged him with the first-degree murder of Elizabeth Sullivan. He was extradited to San Diego, California to stand trial. In January 2018, Mathew was charged with first-degree murder of his wife, Elizabeth Sullivan. After another 2 years of back-and-forth legal proceedings, his trial began on the 21st February 2020 at San Diego Superior Court. The defense argued that Elizabeth left Mathew. They blamed her mental state and affair as evidence, and they said that the email that had been sent to Stephen was proof that she was alive after she had been reported missing. They also said that based on the autopsy evidence, Elizabeth had died in 2016, and so the timeline and theory being presented by prosecutors was false. Based on the medical examiner's initial findings, Elizabeth had only been dead a month, 2 at maximum, before her body was found, which presented a problem for the prosecutors. The prosecution said that the reason Elizabeth's body was in the condition it was 2 years after she was murdered was because her body had been frozen, slowing down the decomposition. The prosecution said that Mathew had murdered Elizabeth on the 13th October 2014 during an argument about her plans for divorce. He then wrapped the body in a plastic wrap he bought and hid the body in the deep freezer outside the house in the garage when police searched the home. The body then stayed in the deep freezer for 2 years. He eventually took the body and threw it in the water near their home when he was relocating to another place with his new pregnant girlfriend. They presented physical evidences that were found in his home. They also presented evidences of Mathew's deteriorating relationship with his wife, Elizabeth. Nathan was called to testify in court. He stated that Mathew knew about Elizabeth's affair. He also knew that Elizabeth was going to file for a divorce. Nathan revealed that he was on his phone with Elizabeth the night prior to her being reported missing. Mathew's defense attorneys pleaded for leniency on Mathew. They asked the judge to take into consideration the fact that Mathew had served 8 years in the U.S. Navy. The defense named all of the awards and accolades that Mathew got while he was in the military. In spite of the defense efforts to prove Mathew's innocence in his wife's death, the jury did not believe them. In March 2020, Mathew Sullivan was found guilty of second-degree murder, and on the 12th March 2020, he was sentenced to 16 years to life in prison.